Mark Burnett. He's the guy that made a game show into reality, and he turned reality into a game show with Survivor. Outwit, outlast, outplay, I think is their motto. Before Mark Burnett's game shows, we had, well, I think we still do have, we had Alex Trebek with Jeopardy, and we had Pat Sajak. And if you lost on those shows, Vanna White would escort you out on Wheel of Fortune. You feel pretty good. And I think if you lose on Jeopardy, they give you like the Jeopardy home game, right? So there's always like a consolation prize. But what Mark did is he injected a sense of brutality into the game show in order to distinguish the winners from the losers. There can be only one winner in Survivor, right? Everybody else is asked to leave the island. And we call that reality when it's harsh and there's only one winner. Because it's harsh like real life. We feel like in real life, either we're winning or we're losing. In the Survivor, the Peacemakers, which is going to be our study today, are often outwitted by the manipulators and the connivers. You can remember those first Survivors that you watched. I might date myself here, but those first Survivors that you watched. And it was always they formed the alliances, but the alliance was always a little bit of a ruse because you were gonna turn around and turn on that person once your need for them was up. Mark Burnett went on to produce The Apprentice. He did that for 14 seasons. Didn't seem like that long. The most exciting thing I think in The Apprentice, the projects were often kind of silly and stupid, and the people really didn't do a good job, especially when you went to Celebrity Apprentice. But the most exciting thing about The Apprentice was back in the boardroom, right? When Trump would call the losers back into the boardroom. He said, bring somebody back in. And he would ask them after they got through talking about, who did what, how the project went. He would ask them, tell me, who should I fire? And that simple question, you could say it's an open-ended question. It turned a nice guy. It turned a diplomat. It turned a team leader into a street fighter. You either had to fight for your place to stay on the show, or he fired you. That one simple question created all the tension, all the drama of the show. And the most exciting thing on the show was that the winner got to stay. We were satisfied with that, weren't we? We were like, yes, the good guy made it. The one that worked the hardest made it. And what happened to the loser? He fired them. They went home. They usually got escorted out in a limousine, so it wasn't too bad. It's very satisfying for us when the worst get booted and the winners receive an award. In our study of Matthew 5, in our continued study of Matthew 5, the Beatitudes, Jesus is going to turn this idea of a peacemaker as a loser on its head. And I think that's what we want from our teachers and our leaders. Hopefully I give you that today. We want a fresh perspective on life. We're pretty much tired of what the world serves up. It gets us running in that hamster wheel. It's a rat race. It doesn't satisfy us. And I think that's probably the same way the people on that hill were feeling in Galilee when Jesus taught his Sermon on the Mount. They were tired, whether they were tired of the Jewish leaders, of the Roman oppression, or their own personal quarrels. They were tired of what the world had to tell them. So here comes a man. They say, hey, this guy has a new idea. I don't even think they called him the Messiah at that point. This guy's got a new idea. Let's go hear what he has to say. I was listening to an interview with Wayne Gretzky. Joe Buck does that little thing where he interviews athletes. And Joe Buck asked Wayne Gretzky a question about practice. Well, did you practice a lot? You're the best hockey player that's ever lived. I'm sure you practiced a lot. And Wayne answered him with this statement. He said, a woman came up to me and she said, how can I get my son to practice more? And he said, oh, well, I never practiced. I just love playing hockey, so I just did it all the time. So like Gretzky, Jesus is going to come from a different direction. He's going to come from the perspective of the kingdom of heaven rather than the material world. And I think sometimes in the Beatitudes, Jesus starts to mix verb tenses. I was an English major, so this may interest me more than it does you. But he starts talking about the future. They will be called the children of God. He says in the present, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And I think a lot of times what he's doing is he sees the future and the present as the same. Whereas we see, we live each day, day by day, and we get a reward at the end. But I think Jesus sees them more as one and the same. But ultimately what Jesus wants to teach is what it means to follow him and what the payoff is. And Jesus, I think by seeing the future, he can see what the payoff is for each and every one of us. He says, I've gone to prepare a place for you. He sees that when he sees a person. He sees what the payoff is. So we'll start with the payoff. And I think that's what the Beatitudes are. They're this teaching about the payoffs of following Jesus. Blessed is the word that's used. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, is our verses today. So we have this idea that we're going to be blessed. We're going to have this happiness. We're going to have this joy. We've been using this word makarios. It's thought that Matthew wrote his gospel in Greek, and he used this word makarios, this idea of inner happiness. So how do we receive the blessings from Jesus? How do we do it? Well, try to cover this in about 30 seconds, but I'll try to do a quick recap of the Beatitudes that we've heard over the past few weeks. First, we enter into a relationship by being poor in spirit. We enter into a relationship with God by being poor in spirit, by admitting that we're spiritually bankrupt. We have nothing to offer. We mourn when we are overwhelmed with our sin. Surprisingly, Jesus tells us this brings us happiness. We're going to get the same thought in James in a few minutes. We put others first to get the blessing. We are meek. Tucker talked about we can't get satisfaction in the things of this world. So we hunger and thirst for righteousness. When we hunger and thirst for righteousness, we are blessed and filled. When we have this newfound righteousness, it manifests itself in mercy, purity, and peacemaking. And finally, we are willing to suffer for the payoff. We are willing to suffer for happiness. And we receive the ultimate reward, that is the kingdom of heaven. When I read through that whirlwind trip of the Beatitudes, I feel like that woman that asked Wayne Gretzky, how do I get my son to practice more? I'm kind of back at what was the question, Jesus? What question did they ask him? Did they say that he answered, blessed are the poor in spirit, or blessed are those who are persecuted? And what he's trying to teach us is how to be a follower of Jesus Christ. That's the question that he's answering that we may not have asked. And it's hard to change our perspective on that, right? We come to Jesus usually with a set of ideas, a set of questions. And he says, no, those questions are good, and I'll take care of those. But let's change the perspective now. Let's put the focus on the person of Jesus Christ and following Jesus Christ rather than Jesus fulfilling your needs. Let's see if we can take this same change on perspective and apply it to peacemaking. For a few minutes, we'll focus on what a peacemaker is and understand the benefit. Is there a benefit to being a peacemaker, or do you get run over by the manipulators and the connivers? Do you ever flip past Joel Osteen on TV, or maybe you go to one of his stadium things, and you hang out on the TV there for a little bit, and you're like, wow, this guy is really positive, and I'm kind of enjoying he's smiling all the time, and he's very uplifting, kind of like Tony Robbins. You don't know what Tony Robbins is saying, but he's saying good things, and good things are supposed to be happening to you. You can walk over coals. You're like, that's pretty exciting. And then you listen to Joel Osteen for a little bit, and what he seems to be saying that as a follower of Jesus Christ, he's going to bless you. He's going to bless you with some sort of prosperity, some sort of material wealth. But I think Jesus is not going to let us get away with that thinking. I follow Jesus, I get prosperity. There's a virtuous circle there, right? He scratches my back, I scratch his, kind of thing. He throws us a curveball there in verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. This comes right after being a peacemaker. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Ultimately, prosperity as the reason for being a peacemaker has to be more fundamental. You've got to be willing to be a peacemaker and you've got to be willing to suffer for that. So if you're willing to suffer, I think you've got to take prosperity as the end result of being a peacemaker off the table. You've got to be willing to suffer for it. In John 16:33, Jesus says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. At peace means that you are reconciled to God through his Son. Romans 5:10 goes on with the same theme. For if while we were God's enemies, we're enemies of God, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? So the idea of a peacemaker has to start with, at first, being at peace with God through his Son. So if you're at peace with God, does that make you a peacemaker? Well, I think that would be a pretty good litmus test if you're at peace, if you're a peacemaker. Usually folks that are content are generous, right? If you're generous, you probably are content. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time parting with those dollars. If you love your wife, you're going to sacrifice for her. If you say you love your wife but you don't sacrifice for her, it probably means you don't love her. So I think being a peacemaker is probably a good litmus test if you're at peace. And if you're at peace, it means you're reconciled with God. I have a young client married into a family that I work with. His estranged father died, leaving a land, a little piece of land with a trailer on it, a truck, and a four-wheeler. And he and his brother are set to inherit the trailer, the truck, and the four-wheeler. And what's the thing that they're arguing about? The four-wheeler, of course, right? So my advice to him was easy, right? Make sure that you lose. If you say to your brother, if you want the four-wheeler, you can have it. Make sure you lose that battle. You've got more resources than he does. It's not worth the fight. So I was thinking to myself, would I give that same advice to the other brother? The guy that's, in debt up to his eyeballs and wants a memory of his dad and, really needs a four-wheeler to go cruising around on the weekends. Where does that other brother, without the resources, where does he get the inspiration to give up what belongs to him? In James 4, James says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. I think this is the position I'm in sometimes. Maybe y'all are in it too. You covet, but you cannot get what you want. So we create our own inner battle within ourselves. Our desires are not fulfilled. Here's James's answer to that inner quarrel. He says, submit yourselves then to God. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. So I think this is a hard lesson that Jesus teaches us. It's hard in the fact that it's easy to say. Change your perspective, humble yourself to God, and he will lift you up. It's easy to say, but it's hard to put into practice. So I think the lesson is this. If you want the strength, which is I think what you need, to have the courage to be able to give up what you want so that someone else can have it, to be a peacemaker, you must believe that the entire kingdom of heaven is already yours. The entire kingdom of heaven is already yours. You are an heir to the kingdom. You are a child of God. You are at peace. So if you're at peace and you want to be a peacemaker, what does a peacemaker do? Well, in our country today, we're all fighting tooth and nail with each other over, political points, right? Whether you're doing it face to face or you're doing it on the radio or you're doing it, on the internet, we're all kind of on Facebook, we're all kind of quarreling with each other. So if you're in a conversation, if you're in a conversation with someone of a different political view, one thing you could do to be a peacemaker that would be very shocking to that person probably would say, you know what, your candidate probably has some really good ideas. And don't do it with a smirk like I did it. Your candidate really wants to serve the people. Full stop. You're not trying to start a fight, which is what a lot of us get into, right? We're not trying to start a fight. We're trying to end a fight. Or maybe they started it. You're not trying to start a fight. You're not trying to continue the fight. You're not trying to win the battle. You're trying to end the fight. You're trying to bring reconciliation to that relationship, right? The same way that we're reconciled to God through Jesus Christ, you're trying to do that with other people. That's what a peacemaker is. You don't want to be right over subsidies for healthcare premiums or not. It's not worth the battle. You want to be reconciled to that person. You want to be a peacemaker. When the new Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, was asked about what worries him the most, he's called Mad Dog Mattis, so they probably threw out this question thinking he was going to come up with some crazy thing about what worries him the most. He's going to say a Mexican invasion or Canadian paratroopers or something. What Mad Dog said was, lack of political unity was the thing that worries him the most. Lack of political unity in this country. And a lack of fundamental friendliness. So as Christians, when we hear General Mattis say that, we're called to be peacemakers by Jesus. So we can't just take that as an issue. It's a political issue of our time. No, we have to say, hey, I'm going to change the culture by being a peacemaker. I'm going to bring unity to my relationships. And we have a lot of spiritual blessings in the Beatitudes. We're going to see God. We're going to be children of God. Ours is the kingdom of heaven. There's a lot of spiritual elements in the Beatitudes. And I think one thing we need to do is say, Jesus, I don't understand what it means to see God, to be a child of God, to inherit the earth, to have the kingdom of heaven. I don't understand that, but I understand that you have a promise for me. And I understand that there is a promise for me, and what I need to do is respond to your call. Respond to that call to be a peacemaker. And essentially, being a peacemaker is a call to spiritual toughness. We understand the benefits of physical toughness and mental toughness. You do a little bit over a long period of time. That's Philip Crone's book, I think. We do a little bit over a long period of time. On the physical, we eat right, we exercise a little bit every day, and at the end, the results exceed our expectations. The same with the mental toughness. If you're in sales, you get rejected. You try to turn the objections into a positive. You do that every day, and you get a sense of mental toughness. You do it with your children. Your children have problems, and they fight with you, and they disappoint you, and they lie to you, but you give them unconditional love. You do that every day, and you build sort of a mental toughness, a mental discipline with your children where you're going to give them unconditional love. And being a peacemaker is that spiritual toughness. Instead of creating quarrels, you're going to create harmony in relationships. You're going to be reconciled with your family, if you can. You're going to bring that example of Jesus Christ. You're going to bring that example of being reconciled with Jesus Christ to others around you. And we know that when we have physical discipline, mental discipline, we know the results exceed our expectations. So Jesus promises us if we do what He's called us to do, we are definitely going to have results that exceed our expectations. So I think we're going to end with verse 10 here in the Beatitudes. We're going to end with that last verse. I think it gives us the real change in our perspective that Jesus is trying to get across. And it also gives us that challenge for spiritual toughness. Verse 10, Matthew 5, verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Let's pray together. Lord, I just pray that you would give each man in here your blessings, that each man in here would go to you to find peace, and that he would be a peacemaker, and that he would bring reconciliation and harmony with all he meets with, all the people that they meet with. In your name we pray, amen.